I received an email earlier this week with words along the lines of, "Now that we are in quieter times again, maybe time to spend looking at such and such." I giggled to myself, aware of an irony, but not quite able to articulate it. For whilst we shift back into national lockdown, life feels busier than ever. And I'm sure I'm not alone in this feeling, but how can that be? I didn't have long to wait for a bit of insight into my own situation. For each month I meet with my spiritual director, and this happened to fall on Friday. After the familiar opening minutes where I effuse about the 10 zillion things that are whizzing around in my mind, he responds simply with silence. With a silent, knowing gaze. He holds it just long enough to allow me to see a glimmer of the metaphorical mirror he is about to hold up. The light begins to dawn, and I smile to myself, and I think he knows that smile too, because then follow the questions. So where is God in all this? What does God have to say about this? We have been meeting for many years, and he asks these same questions or variants of them every time we meet. Of course he asks them. I need him to ask them. I would be utterly lost if he didn't ask them. From the moment of asking, the focus of our time together is transformed. It moves away from me being at the centre and onto God. So silence falls, and we sit. And sometimes we sit just for a few minutes, and sometimes for a very long time. My attention turns first to stilling my breathing, and then I begin to notice my heartbeat. Slowly stilling the whirring and whizzing and fizzing and banging and complications that are going on in my thoughts. Eventually I am stilled enough to see and feel again that gaze of God upon my soul. Sometimes a fleeting glimmer, his breath upon my face, his heartbeat warm and comforting and consoling. Joining with mine, a whisper, a word, a vision, a picture. Hearing the word of the Lord demands a deep silence, a stillness, and a willingness to be present. And for some, perhaps it comes naturally, easily. But for most of us, I suspect only through years and years and years of practice and perseverance, and possibly with a guide, an accompanier, an Eli, a Philip, someone who holds us to account for stilling and listening and hearing that quiet whisper or that loud shout, but ultimately for responding to the intimate presence of God. Silence, presence, and a capacity and a desire to hear are central to the story of Samuel. Indeed, to the Gospel and to many, many of the calls that we hear about throughout the Bible. The word of the Lord was rare in those days, says the Samuel storyteller. Visions were not widespread. The situation could not be more serious, for the word of the Lord is nothing less than the sustaining and renewing source of our life, and the people of ancient Israel are deaf to it. Deaf to what they need the most. In the temple where the young Samuel lies, dawn has yet to come. He lies in the very presence of the Lord, yet has not yet come to know him. The one whom his life has been permitted to serve since his very youngest years. The one who is in the very ark, here in the temple beside him. In a nearby room, out of sight and sound of what is happening, lays the priest, Eli. the one into whose guardianship the boy Samuel was placed many years before. Eli, his body frail and his sight dim, mirroring the very decline in his leadership and possibly in his faith. Complacent until this, his old age, at the many sins of his own sons for which they and he are to be punished. Oblivious to his own neglect of his calling and his vocation, his responsibilities. These are indeed dark times, but the light of God's presence is not wholly extinguished. New hope is coming. Samuel's vocation to the minister to the Lord is dawning. A few years ago, the BBC ran a series called The Big Silence. 5 people volunteered to be part of this, and they spent time in a monastery learning about silent meditation, indeed learning to silently meditate. Only one of these came with Christian faith, and none had tried anything like this before. Most of them already recognised that their busy, hectic lifestyles were a way of avoiding and shying away from the unresolved aspects of their own story, and all acknowledged that they were searching for something. Searching in their busyness, searching in the chaos and the whizzing and the whirring and the thinking and the doing. Searching. So embarking on an 8-day silent retreat was hard. And occasionally in this series, the narrator told us that they rebelled. They rebelled, breaking the silence and talking to each other. But in a culture like ours, that bases its life around endless distraction and busyness and doing, surely this was not so much rebellion as simply reverting to type. The real rebellion, indeed the very real challenge for us all, is to choose silence, to be still. In our words, our bodies, our minds and our hearts. For us to refuse to be other than truly vulnerably present to ourselves and to the call of God. Samuel, Samuel. 3 times Samuel heard his name in the silence and depths of the night. 3 times he rose and hastened to his mentor Eli, assuming it was he who called. And on his 3rd visit, the light dawned in Eli's perception. A call from the Lord was breaking upon this young man's life. Samuel returned to his bed as he was instructed, and the Lord came and stood there, calling as before, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel replied, "Speak, for your servant is listening." God calls each of us by name, and each of us are called for a reason. The Bible is full of stories of people of God being called, and many of them failing to respond to their call either immediately or at all. Some run away. Some seem to miss the calling entirely. Yes, Samuel was called to be a prophet. And so each two of us have a specific call, maybe not as challenging as Samuel's, but certainly it will be challenging. And this call might be seasonal, it might be lifelong, but it is a part of our faith to believe and know that God has a specific call upon each of us. Our responsibility is to listen, to discipline ourselves to listen, to watch, to respond, to be open to the help of others as they seek to help us to discern, painful as that can often be. And for us, in turn, to ask those tricky questions, those simple questions, but so tricky, helping us to discern the call of God in our lives amongst all the busyness. Epiphany is a season of great hope, a time to embrace our place in the journey ahead of us, as together we in this community discern the call of God upon our life as individuals and as a whole community. Amen.